Hello, it is Saturday, July 29th, 2023 at 11:06 a.m. Eastern Time, USA. I'm Mitch Miller. This is my video journal. So today I just want to talk about the war in Ukraine, right? And I kind of want to summarize this as best I can. So the conflict in Ukraine, look, I can look at both sides of this. I'm a neutral party, try to stay as neutral as possible, and this is my neutral analysis, right? You have a faction of the population that believes in disarmament. They want to disarm especially devastating weapons like nuclear weapons, fire bombs, things like that. You have another faction of the population that feeds into the mainstream media or the state-run media, that they have fear of other nations. Instead of working with other nations, they have a fear of other nations. They blame other nations for their problems. And so they want to arm themselves. They want to arm allies, or so-called allies, or quasi-allies. And you have that faction of the population, right? So if we look at countries like Russia, they sometimes allegedly help nations like Iran with their nuclear programs so that they can develop a nuclear weapon, right? Now that's alleged. But that's an example. They may help other nations, arm them so that they're friendly towards Russia. The United States does the same exact thing. They arm all kinds of governments all around the world so that they're friendly to the United States. With Ukraine, you have an interesting situation, right? Ukraine, when the fall of the Soviet Union occurred, Ukraine had nuclear arms, nuclear weapons. After a bunch of talks, negotiations, the United States, its allies, convinced Ukraine to hand over its nuclear arms. They kept their nuclear power plants, but they handed over their nuclear arms. They disarmed. They disarmed from the nuclear arena. And the United States, its allies, made a loose agreement, handshake, verbal, whatever. It might have been written, I think it was written in some kind of doctrine, that they would help Ukraine defend itself in return for Ukraine disarming, at least in the nuclear arena, right? Now Russia, if we look at the Russia aspect, it benefited Russia because they probably, even though they had puppet regimes in Ukraine and a lot of influence, they probably didn't want those nuclear arms right next door. Because if we look at it now, Russia, one of the reasons for this invasion into Ukraine is that they were probably getting intel that Ukraine was going to join NATO, which means NATO was going to park nuclear weapons right next to Russia's border. Nobody wants that to happen. No nation wants the nation next to it to have nuclear weapons within striking distance of anywhere in its country. Now if we go back to 2014, 2013, whatever, Russia seized Crimea to test the waters for if it could invade and take over territory in Ukraine, and the world stage didn't act very much, right? Because the rationale was they annexed Crimea. The Russians explained that they annexed Crimea because a lot of Russians had second homes there. It was a resort type of area on the Black Sea. A lot of the population was friendly to Russia, so they annexed them so that the Russian population wasn't oppressed. And because most of the population of Crimea was either friendly to Russia, most of the land in Crimea was owned by Russians, so therefore it went hand in hand that they would annex it. Now Russia says that Ukraine had neo-Nazis running the country, and to defend itself, it had a special military operation in Ukraine. So they saw that they could seize territory in Crimea. The rationale is neo-Nazis are running the government and they're going to join NATO, and I think the better argument is that they were going to join NATO in the near future, and therefore nuclear arms would be pointed in Russia's direction rather than the other way. So they invaded to install a friendly government, basically, to Russia, like they had back when the Soviet Union fell, and they still had those nuclear arms. So, but the point I want to make here is that we had a country that disarmed itself. It had agreements, and it disarmed from the nuclear arena. And that overall is a good thing, right? If we want North Korea to disarm it someday, Iran, if they develop a nuclear arms, disarmament, in my opinion, is a good thing. I think we should disarm to the point where we're just having pistol duels to settle all our disputes. Maybe we have some big ships, aircraft carriers, we still have the jets, we still have the military equipment to keep peace in case somebody amassed arms again, like we've seen happen in World War II and other wars. But ultimately, most devastating bombs and arms are agreed upon by the world stage to be worthless and are just there as a deterrent and to keep peace. So we had the country of Ukraine disarm itself. It handed over its nuclear weapons. So for the Russians, I would say, you have to understand that the United States and its allies are obligated to support Ukraine. And they're obligated to do it both by the agreements they made and the notion that we can get a country, an entire sovereign nation, to hand over their nuclear weapons and agree not to build any new nuclear weapons. This idea is very important. It's extremely important. The fact that we successfully accomplished it is huge. And I think any leadership, any country should appreciate that and appreciate the position that the United States and its allies are in and why they're putting so much money into Ukraine and arms and things like that. Now, I think a step towards disarmament would be to replace nuclear warheads with armed autonomous flying drones or boat drones or other autonomous technology that could potentially be controlled by artificial intelligence, right? It's a threat factor. How will the artificial intelligence judge humanity, and what targets will they acquire when they're empowered to try to create world peace, right? So that, I think, overall sums up what I'm trying to get out here. But again, you have countries like North Korea that have nuclear arms. They're developing rocket programs for intercontinental ballistic missiles. And again, I'm neutral, so I look at the opportunity in every situation instead of buying into the media and the fear-mongering, right? And from my perspective, I look at it as if North Korea wants to develop rockets that can send satellites up into space, someone that against the mainstream, the leader of North Korea, might be convinced to build the technology to go up and retrieve satellites out of orbit around the Earth. And we need those types of thinkers in case we're trapped by Elon Musk's ever-growing net of satellites transmitting wireless waves onto the surface of the Earth, right? So if you have that option out there, where maybe there's one leader that will develop the technology to go up and take those satellites down, not just blow them up and smash them and create a bunch of space debris, but someone that might fund the program to take satellites out of orbit, I think it's not a high value, but there's a certain amount of value in that idea that not everyone in the world looks at satellite systems as great progress, technological progress that's going to further humanity in some astounding way. Right? So I try to look at all aspects as a neutral party. So looking at Iran developing a nuclear program, yeah, there's obvious serious implications that they could deliver a nuclear weapon to a terrorist group that could somehow smuggle that into the United States and set it off in a city center, right? That's the ultimate fear with Iran developing nuclear arms. And there's talk of, I'm seeing on C-SPAN over this past week, of Israel attacking Iran because they're on the brink of developing a nuclear weapon. Again, I think my peace treaty solves this issue, and I think and here's the downside of the movie Don't Look Up, the movie about the asteroid hitting the Earth. A bunch of countries are going to launch nuclear weapons at the asteroid to blow it up, but the corporate billionaires convince the United States government to abort that mission because there's precious metals and materials on the asteroid that they want to capture in some harebrained scheme that doesn't work out, and the planet Earth ends up being destroyed because we left it up to a few eccentric billionaires, right? So that's the threat with the United States and the power structure in the United States. Now I want to put in my peace treaty, if it's not already there, I got to read it again, a clause that says if a planet-killing asteroid or an asteroid that could alter the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, if it struck the Earth, is identified on a collision course, every nuclear-armed nation must put forward a full effort to destroy or alter the course of that asteroid at the soonest possible time, to give time for secondary and tertiary missions to alter course if that initial mission fails. So that will find its way into my peace treaty eventually. But the downside of Don't Look Up is that nuclear programs around the world can be justified right? Iran can justify a nuclear program because the insane people running the United States probably won't blow up an asteroid. And that's the only reason I think we should keep nuclear programs in existence and not phase them out in 100 years, is because we need that material, we need them readily available, the warheads readily available in case something threatens the United States, or I'm not sorry, not the United States, threatens the planet Earth. So the nuclear-armed nations are the protectors of the planet Earth, and I could see why nations like Iran and other nations with alternative viewpoints as to society and what is good and evil would want to develop these programs. Now, if you sign the treaty and say you don't need to arm yourself in this way, we have plenty of nuclear arms, and we will full faith put forward an effort as soon as possible to give time for other nations to try their missions to alter the course of something like this, then I believe you can deter nations from developing these arms. And ultimately they want to be taken seriously on the world stage, legitimized as a regime. And these regimes, you can call them dictatorships, you can call them, there's all kinds of key words. It's a leadership structure that is justified and validated by usually a state-run media structure, a media system that is skewed towards supporting and validating this leadership structure. And that's what we have in the United States, only it's for billionaires, right? We say it's okay to be a billionaire and have this huge amount of wealth and manipulate the economy and the entire society so that you can keep that wealth and oppress large populations in the United States. So that's what I mainly wanted to get out on this video. As far as the media, again, freedom of speech and freedom of the press is very important, but if it's a for-profit media system, you're going to have issues. And that's why I think the United States should have some sort of state-funded media outlet that just presents facts, that has watchdog organizations that double-check those facts and report an easily reportable way to say you got it wrong here, so on and so forth. And maybe that example in the United States would leak out to other state-run media systems in Russia, China, other nations, and they would adopt a similar system where they only present the facts, and when it's skewed towards supporting a political ideology or viewpoint, the fact checkers, the watchdogs, the college professors can then have an easy way to report it, and they're protected through the system so that they're not retaliated against for reporting fallacies, ideological propaganda, things like that. If we do it in the United States, maybe in 10 years, similar things will spread to these nations with state-run media programs. So that's what I wanted to say today. Thanks for watching. Join me sometime next week. I'll probably do another one of these. But that's the situation in Ukraine. I hope both sides can understand, right? Russia doesn't want nuclear weapons right next door, so they have a special military operation. They use propaganda to justify it. Every nation does that when they go to war or a conflict. The United States made agreements with Ukraine when they disarmed, and this is a phenomenal occurrence. This is a really good thing that Ukraine voluntarily handed over nuclear weapons. We need that option available to the world global governing community. And so therefore, they have to support efforts in Ukraine because they made those agreements. And if we don't support this, we'll never talk another nation into disarming again. So those are the stakes at play in Ukraine. And again, I think through forums and things like that, in a social media, or not a social media company, a technology company based out of Ukraine, we can alter the course of this conflict, war, whatever you want to call it. Bring peace and prosperity to the world and address issues in other places like Sudan. I see Niger is having issues, having a coup. So who knows who propagated that, but we can address these issues as they come. So that's it. I want to wish you peace, prosperity, and homeostasis. Thanks.